but they drowning. My head on the swivel, yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 195 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at DynastyDadFF. Joined as always by my man, Mung. How you doing tonight, man? We got 4 more weeks till the fantasy playoffs roll around. Like 4 more. It just feels like, it wasn't that long ago where we were talking about NFL kickoff. And like every year, it feels like it goes quicker and quicker.
I actually didn't realize we were already that close to the fantasy playoffs, but certainly it seems like it's been a more chaotic season than usual, right? I don't know about your leagues, but a lot of mine, a lot of teams at 5-5, 4-6, 6-4. So these next few weeks can really determine a lot in terms of playoff seeding or even just making the playoffs. So this is the time to really buckle down, make those trades to finalize and prepare for those crucial weeks 15 through 17.
Let's talk about those teams first, and that's what I really want to hone in on is those 6-4s to 4-6s. I feel like if you're 3-7, you got less than a 50% chance. I mean, you got to look at what your schedule is. One thing I've noticed is, and I don't know if it's like that in your leagues, I'm in 18 of them, 15 of them. There are at least 3 teams in the collapse for Caleb. We were going to talk about the 101 and stuff like that, but I mean, there are. I start looking at my schedule this time of year, and I'm like, who do I play this week? Who do I play next week? Who do I play there? And a couple of them is like I play back-to-back tanking teams. I mean, we are seeing more and more of that. So that's something we definitely got to keep in mind. But how do you look at it if you're in that 6-4 to 4-6 range? Like what kind of advice do you have for people in that range of what you're particularly doing with your teams?
Well, in college, I had a friend named Alex, and one of his some of his words of wisdom to me were, sometimes in life, it's not always about the path you choose. That's about how confidently you go down that path. And that's particularly appropriate for this time of the season, because if you are 4-6, if you are 6-4, 5-5, maybe you just need to make a decision and start making moves, because this is the time of year where a lot of teams, once they realize they're no longer in contention, they are looking to sell. But the contending teams generally, unless they're super stacked, only have a number of firsts, right? Only have so many young prospects they can give up for win now pieces. So if you wait too long, right? If you kind of half-ass it and try to compete, but don't really make any major moves, you might find yourself with some contending assets on a team that isn't going to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
And by that time, it's possible that those top 3 or 4 seeds have already made some all-in moves, and they no longer have a lot of firsts or a lot of younger players to trade to you for those pieces, and then you're kind of stuck. So I think it's time to really do a detailed evaluation. And if you guys need help, you can reach out to us. We can help you evaluate too, depending on your roster and your league's other rosters, whether or not you should be making a push, and then what types of moves might make sense.
I like it, because we always talk about the beginning of the year to honestly assess your roster, right? And I think right now, if you're 4-6 or even 6-4, you got to honestly assess your roster. See, how do I compare with everybody else in max point 4? Because there's been seasons where you're in an area where you're in 3rd place, but you could easily 5th place. You're 6-4, but you're the last in the league in points, or second to last in there. You want to look at who your opponents are coming up. You want to look at the stage of your roster. Like I'm in 18 leagues, and I only have 3 of them that are in this range, in this 6-4, this 4-6, and 2 of them I had Kyler Murray as my QB2, and I was like, I'm just gonna let it play out a little bit. Now I think I'm ready to roll. You know what I mean? I have, a bunch of young assets. Everybody on the team is 24 to 26 range or younger, and I got my first. There's no reason for me to try to bow out. I still think I have a chance. There's other ones where it's like, all right, I'm 4-6 and I got Travis Kelce. I have, DeAndre Hopkins, James Conner, Keenan Allen. And it's like, all right, I got one of 2 options here. I either got to sell whatever else I have to get into that spot, or I got to start selling these assets to start the rebuild process now. And I think a lot of people, we preach it, top 3, bottom 3. But if you're in this area, this is the week to make that decision, right? Week 10, week 11, you got 4 weeks. I loved your point about, we all say, hey, hold on to that first till the end. I think that time is now, right? Like we talk about holding on to that pick, not trading for Derrick Henry for that late 24 first until the right time, not trading for Josh Dobbs for that 24 first. Yeah, that's a thing now. Not trading for Keenan Allen. Now's the time, right? You need that guy for those last 4 weeks. It's time to push in or push out and hit us up for those. I mean, that's we've seen enough of them that we can look at a roster and say, okay, he's not a contender. If you're one injury away from being out of the playoffs, you're also not a contender. You got to start looking at the bigger picture.
Well, and to your point, I think points fielded is a good barometer because it does help you establish where you truly line up against the other contending teams. But that's not the only thing, right? Let's say you're 7-3, but your running backs are Gus Edwards and Dante Foreman. Mm-hmm. And how good do you really feel about that team?
Yeah.
Because we know that Keaton Mitchell's coming on a little bit. And in general, the Ravens have gotten a ton of touchdowns on the ground through their running backs. And at some point, regression is going to hit, and Lamar Jackson is going to account for more of those, either through the air or with his legs, right? Mm-hmm. And then with Dante Foreman, he's been awesome. He had a huge game a few weeks ago. He did well against Carolina last week. But now you have Khalil Herbert coming back. Roschon Johnson, we know rookie running backs take a little while to get ramped up and become a bigger part of the game plan. So how confident do you really feel about Dante Foreman as your RB2, perhaps, come playoff time? Right. So even if you do have a good record, at least consider where you still have holes and where you've gotten by perhaps without actually having strong depth at a certain position.
And in these kind of scenarios where you're in that 4 to 6 to 6 and 4 range, one thing I've been doing, and it's not new to anybody who listens to the podcast, but I mean, I've been trading running backs for insulated trades. Like I gave up Tony Pollard for Keaton Mitchell in a 24 first. Maybe he pans out and scores more points than Tony Pollard, but now I got that first to kind of build off of. And when you get to this area, right, the guys that want to buy those veteran assets, you got to charge them more than what we were charging them 6 weeks ago, right? Like there is a premium here. You want Keenan Allen, you're paying a first. You're not going to get him for 2 seconds. You're not going to get him, for a second and an add-on. You got to give up a first, or you're going to have to give up, an asset that is going to cost you. And if you're in those areas, do you agree that there should be a premium? Like if I'm at that 4 and 6 range and I have, Keenan Allen, now's the time I say to the whole league, hey, Keenan Allen, he's available. I'm bowing out. What are you guys willing to pay? I think a lot of times people take the first offer for those veterans because they're trying to unload them. And I'm completely against that.
That's really tough because it is so league dependent, right? I do get questions on Twitter saying, nobody in my league wants Christian McCaffrey, which is kind of ludicrous when you hear it. Mm-hmm. But there are certain leagues that just aren't willing to pay multiple firsts for certain players and at that point, you really have to evaluate your roster honestly, because sometimes you just need to get what you can while you can. But in the case of elite pieces like a McCaffrey, then maybe it's just worth holding because, yes, he's getting up there in age, but that doesn't mean he can't have another elite season next year, right? Mm-hmm. Or that his value can't maintain in the offseason because he is a little bit different in terms of aging running backs. Absolutely. Because of how he's used as a receiver. So that one's really league dependent, but certainly you don't want to sell for anything, right? Because look at guys like Keenan Allen or Stephon Diggs who are up there in age, who were written off last offseason by quite a few people. And sometimes older players can shock us, right? Even Adam Thielen, a lot of people are selling for thirds. Mm-hmm. And even though, yes, no one's really excited to have Adam Thielen on your roster come September, as we've seen, guys like that come October, November this year may have helped you get to a 7-3 record.
Yeah, those are great points. And you can buy those guys now. You can still get them on the cheap. You go out there and you make some of those kind of moves. And I think it's a matter of just, you said it, knowing your league mates. You got to, every league, one guy said, no one will pay up for AJ Brown in my league. He's like, I want to start rebuilding, but I have AJ Brown. And you're like, I think what we're seeing from the wide receiver position is with Stephon Diggs, with, like you said, Keenan Allen, even, to a lesser extent, Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams, is like these guys are playing longer and the value is dipping, but the production is still there. And if you can still hold on to those guys, it's not the worst thing.
Yeah, and again, if we can, as gross as it may sound, learn a lesson from the Texans, sometimes, the fantasy gods work in mysterious ways. Even if you don't get the actual 101, everyone wants Caleb Williams, but maybe Drake May's the guy, right? People passed on CJ Stroud in Superflex Dynasty rookie drafts for Bryce Young, for Jahmyr Gibbs, and that looks like a mistake right now. So even if you don't end up with a 101 or 102, you get a little bit of a better record because you held on to a guy like A.J. Brown instead of selling him for less than what you wanted. Maybe you still get a superstar at 103 or 104, because at the end of the day, it's sometimes just not possible to lock in the 101. But as long as you get a fairly high draft pick, there's going to be value in there for a rebuild.
And we're going to talk about this, when we get John back, and talk about the rebuild process, where I'm seeing people, we've taught it the right way, but I'm seeing people send me a roster of, like, anytime I talk about Caleb Williams, they're like, I got the 101 locked up. And I'm like, your best player is Jahan Dotson. Yeah, sure, you got the 101, but this is a long process, right? Like, that's not what we're trying to do, and trying to get ourselves into position for that 101 by tanking everything we have, but strategically placing there. So I want to talk about some trades now. The Patreon, there are hundreds of trades being discussed daily, but I want to break down some trades here that guys sent in, get your opinion, and then talk about them into a couple different lights. The first one sent in from Fleeced by Chas. He received Javonte Williams, a 24 first, which he says is mid superflex, for Kenneth Walker. So Kenneth Walker and Javonte and a first.
He got Kenneth Walker in the first?
No, Javonte Williams in a first for Kenneth Walker.
Oh, got it. Yeah, I like that. I would say a mid-first is about right for Walker. There are some concerns with Zach Charbonnet seeing more and more playing time. The Seahawks schedule is a little bit rough for running backs coming up. So overall, I like that. Javonte Williams has started to see more and more of the workload. So if you are looking to contend, I think you basically got comparable production and a first on top.
Yeah, you look at the last 2 weeks, and this is something we talked about, where it was going to take some time. It was going to take to get some of that rust away. He wasn't getting a ton of carries. Last 2 weeks, they took the restrictions off. 27 carries, 21 carries, and he's been the RB9, the RB5. We were talking about him being a league winner, several months ago. He showed some flashes, but the Broncos were pretty smart with him. Like, they didn't go out there and try to give him 25 carries week one. Samaje Perine's a thing in the past. Jaleel McLaughlin is a nice stash right now because he's shown some flashes, but Javonte Williams is still too cheap. I think I would pay 108 range for Javonte Williams right now. And I know I'm not advocating going out there. I know he's not been your guy, but in this particular trade, I think it's an absolute smash accept, where you can insulate Kenneth Walker with a 24 first, which might be equal value, and then you get Javonte Williams for free.
Yeah, that's the key word, right? Because I've always been lower on Williams because of the risk. And as good as he's looked, I think there's still risk of compensatory injuries because he's coming back from that serious knee injury. But at the same time, insulates the key word, because you are taking on the risk, but you're mitigating that with that first round draft pick.
Even if that's a late first, I still think it's there. Even if that's 110, I still think it's there, because this class is going to be deep. At 110 this year was Devin Achane. By the way, my man is scheduled to practice again. If we get him back, this is the biggest. You and I were pretty high on him. We had him up there, and then he blew up, and he's been out for like 4 weeks. And I have people saying, should I trade Alvin Kamara straight up for Devin Achane? Should I, or no, the other way around? Should I trade Achane for Kamara? Should I trade Achane for Mixon? I'm like, whoa. Like, there was a point where we were ready to make him like RB5 in Dynasty, and I haven't moved him down because he's been elite when he's been on the field. How do you see that shaking out rest of schedule? Because, Mostert is losing some gas. Mostert has not been the same player over the last couple of weeks. I think Achane's a league winner that is somehow getting depressed value.
Yeah, he's not that dissimilar from Jahmyr Gibbs. right? Because we knew that Montgomery's coming back, but we saw that the Lions were willing to actually give goal line work to Jahmyr Gibbs, which we'd been screaming for since week 1. And while Montgomery's still involved, he's still probably going to vulture a touchdown here or there. Certainly had a great 75-yard touchdown run against the Chargers, but we know at this point you can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? Jahmyr Gibbs is the 1A. And I do think that even prior to the injury, we were seeing Achane take over that 1A position in the Miami backfield. So, yeah, I wouldn't go out and drop Mostert or sell low just to sell. But I do think it's more so Achane's a back-end RB1 rest of season and Mostert more so in that flex territory.
Dude, Jahmyr Gibbs is looking like the 1A of dynasty running backs. Like, that is just – he has been – the usage that he has right now is really what we want to see from Bijan Robinson as well. But, like, man, this kid's special. This is something truly remarkable, and I'm
the offensive line for Detroit is just so phenomenal. So and that's why I still have Gibbs firmly ranked above Achane as well. But in general, I think if you got Achane for a discount, right, considering where they were drafted in rookie drafts, you're pretty happy with whichever running back you have right now.
For sure. The next one, another insulated trade, but this one looks like, let's see, Kendre Miller and a mid to late 24 first, or Javonte Williams and Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson has low key I believe he's RB6 on the season now, and he's had a couple boom games there. But would you rather have Javonte Williams and Brian Robinson or Kendre Miller and a mid to late first?
Yeah, I think, as you said, Williams is worth that late first, even if it's a little earlier, closer to mid, and definitely prefer Brian Robinson right now over Kendre Miller. So I like that a lot if you're contending. That's
from our boy MP Fleming, obviously blowing up the Patreon always. So great guy. Another one. I mean, Javonte Williams seems like the trend here, and we talk so much. It's sometimes an echo chamber. And I love that in the Discord, it's like what we're talking about translates into there and guys sharing their opinions, and I think Javonte Williams is someone that everybody seems to be buying in on. This one's huge. So you might want to get your pen out. Javonte Williams, Drake London, Chris Olave, Tajay Spears, and a 24 first, a 24 second, and a 26 first, and a 26 second. For Bijan Robinson, a 25 first, Tank Dell, Michael Pittman, and Trey McBride.
Yeah, give me that one more time.
Let's make it a little bit easier. So we got Javonte Williams, Drake London, and Chris Olave are the three main pieces.
Yep.
The three main pieces on the bottom are Michael Pittman, Trey McBride, and Bijan Robinson. So without getting into that, and then it looks like on the top end, there's an extra first involved. So Javonte, London, Olave first, or Pittman, McBride, Bijan, and Dell.
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty fair because if you look at it as, I think I lean the first side because to me it comes down to, let's call it London and Olave for Bijan is fairly close in my eyes because I just don't know that we're going to see the ceiling with London with potentially Ritter back rest of the season, depending on Heineke's hamstring injury and just that Atlanta offense in general, right?
Yeah.
And Olave too, kind of hamstrung by Carr's ineptitude, but long-term still great talents at wide receiver. So that's close to me. Pittman with the first, obviously you prefer Javonte over McBride a little bit, but if McBride maintains like 25-30% target share with Kyler Murray, he could be a solid value. So I think the value is slightly on the first side, but it's close overall.
Yeah. My question here is with Bijan Robinson. So, I mean, last week we would have been like, okay, people are starting to hit the panic button. They started to get him a little bit more involved here. Like people created a buy window on Bijan Robinson, where we were kind of moving around here. If you're a playoff team, his schedule is juicy down the stretch. Are you trusting in Bijan Robinson, or are you trying to buy, I think you could get Christian McCaffrey plus. Are you trying to make a trade where you get McCaffrey in a 25 first or McCaffrey and a mid 24 second, or are you riding it out with Bijan Robinson?
Honestly, I don't think you get that right now. I understand the age gap, but in season, McCaffrey's so elite that I don't know that you're going to get a first on top of him for Bijan. I think maybe a second to swap for the age gap. In general, I do think that it is trending towards a Bijan backfield, right? They're going into the bye now. Arthur Smith seems to have been willing to use him a lot more against Arizona, with Algier taking a backseat. I think it was a season high in snaps for Bijan, 77% against Arizona. So the hope is that he does become the workhorse. And I think you're fine holding him unless you really get a deal that makes sense to sell him if you're contending.
Yeah, you're getting like a Kelsey McCaffrey for Bijan and something else that's not active right now. I like it. Next one sent in from Ty Kelly. This is a rebuild scenario. He gives up Devontae Adams and Travis Kelce, gets T. Higgins a 24 second and a 26 first.
I think ideally I'd want that first to be a lot earlier than 2026. I mean, that's 3 years out. It's not even 2025.
I'm seeing a lot of that. Like the 24 first, just for our listeners, a 24 first is not the same as a 25 and a 26. They're not valued the same way. You can't, when you're talking about an asset, a lot of times in the rebuild process, people are just say any first, but you got to think about it. It's like, I want that 24 first for what I can do with it, right? Because I can take that 24 first and get a 25 first plus something. I can get a 26 first plus, and you get those areas where you can hit on a Devin A-Chain with that late first and then sell him for 25 first. So you know what I mean? You move into that area. And for our listeners, I mean, I think that's something that we got to stress a little bit more when we talk about insulating with a trade, because a lot of times people hit me up. They're like, oh, this is what you were talking about. I got a 26 first. And it's like, it's not quite the same.
Yeah, I was actually trying to explain this to someone through Twitter DMs maybe a couple of weeks ago. And basically think of a rookie first round draft pick as $100, right? Do you want that $100? Let's say I'm selling you my watch. Would you prefer it if I gave you that $100 next May or in 2026, right? Because if I give you the $100 next May, you can buy something with it, you can invest in it. If you're not seeing this till 2026, I mean, who's to say what's going to happen by that point? Do you even need the watch? What's going on with the economy, right? And a lot of things can happen where,
and like leagues folding, the watch might disappear.
Right. If your league isn't established with a lot of close friends or guys that you've known a long time, then who's to say that this league is still happening in 2026? So in general, we also say a 2024 first come rookie draft time, you can probably get a 2025 first plus second for it, right? And then you flip the 2025 first maybe in 2 years for a 2026 first plus second. So you're really losing value if you're not getting the earlier pick, even if you do think it's going to be later, because there's no way to project where 2025 or 2026 is even going to end up.
And when we look at like this particular draft, if you took Jordan Addison, that's worth more than a 24 first, right? And if you took Zay Flowers, that's at least worth a 24 first. And even if you took Quentin Johnston, it's still probably worth a 25 first. You know what I mean? Like you didn't depreciate the value.
I mean, that might not be the best example, but I get
you understand
what
I'm saying. Like the upside is still there. So.
Yeah, because generally these rookies appreciate or hold value for their rookie seasons. And in some cases, they can really appreciate. Look at CJ Stroud, look at A-Chan, who are drafted fairly late, given what they've produced so far.
Yeah, even like Sam Laporta in that area. Speaking of A-Chain, sent in from memes, he put Devin A-Chain, 26 fourth, and $1 fab. I've never seen that one thrown in here for Joe Mixon and 2 firsts, or 24 seconds. So 2 Mixon in 2 seconds, or A-Chain and $1 fab.
Oh, it's A-Chain easily. I don't. The Mixon's been getting a ton of work, but the production has yet to be there. The usage is great. It's what we've always wanted from him, right?
Yep.
It's just the efficiency isn't quite what we expected.
The efficiency is horrible, but he's QB or RB16 coming out of the bye, RB8, RB9, RB22. and he's getting crazy volume, and there's no one else that's coming to take it. So it's like Mixon's a great guy to buy for a contending team, but Devin Achane's going to score more points. And
Yeah,
so
they're just. I would need at least a first, if not more, to move down a tier, especially given Mixon's age.
Yeah, a first and a second, and I'd do it. I consider it at least. You know what I mean? But the big thing here is, sorry about that. You have to look at the age versus production. If you're talking about buying a guy who's young, who's not producing, but when A-Chain comes back, I think you got an RB1 or the rest of the way. Mixon's just an RB1 based out of necessity. So.
Yeah, if it's a guy like Eckler, sure, I'm willing to take on a little more risk with the age because he is producing at least.
This one sent in from Chips. He sent in Hollywood Brown or Jahan Dotson and a 24 fourth. I don't ever really – I want to talk about fourths because I would just use them as throw-ins. I don't think I've drafted a fourth rounder, except I did one. I drafted one fourth-round pick, 412. You want to guess who it was? It's Puka Nacua. So,
there you go.
That doesn't always pan.
That's definitely the exception to the rule, though.
That was the sexiest trade I made all offseason was I traded Jonathan Taylor for A.J. Brown, the 210 and the 412, and the 210 was Laporta and the 412 was Nacua. That's like just, we'll put that in the Sistine Chapel kind of deal. But Hollywood Brown struggled, with his first week back. Kyler looked great, but I think this is a buy low window here. And I think if you could get Hollywood Brown for Jahan Dotson and you didn't have to give a second on top of that, I think it's a smash.
Yeah, I love that. Super cheap for Brown. Dotson has been incredibly inconsistent, as good as Howell's played. And look, as you said, Marquise Brown, look at this playoff schedule. They get San Francisco in week 15, first round of the fantasy playoffs. We know they're going to be trailing in that one, probably going to have to throw a lot. They get Chicago in week 16, and they get the Eagles in week 17. I mean, those are
270 and 2 touchdowns every week. So,
yeah, those are all trailing game scripts where we expect Kyler to need to throw a ton. Now, look, A.J. Terrell basically shut down Marquise Brown this past week, but their schedule gets much easier after this past week.
I'm all in on Kyler. That's been my thing since March, and it's panning out. This one sent in from Bear Down 34, another great guy in the Patreon. He is rebuilding and trying to shave off some points. So he got Dallas Goedert and Roschon Johnson, and he gave away Trey McBride and Jerome Ford. Now, I know we've already alluded to Trey McBride, so I want to kind of elaborate on him a little bit. Jerome Ford's on the cheap. You get Dallas Goedert, who's a proven top 8 dynasty tight end, but he's not going to score you any points. So this one has two folds. When you get a proven asset, you get a Nick Chubb, a Dallas Goedert, and Anthony Richardson, and you put them on your rebuilding team, you're improving your own first. So I think it's a slight value loss, but I think it's a long-term gain.
Yeah, I like it a lot. We like the volume for McBride rest of season. I love Ford as an RB2 rest of season. But long-term, I would say that Goddard still has more draft capital and talent that we've seen. So I like it.
This one sent in from Vintage J. Again, these guys love the rebuild. They love the insulation. I love when they talk the lingo. He said, Chris Godwin and the 109 to 112 or Devonta Smith. Now this one's, you can look at it both directions here. Chris Godwin, and let's call it the 109 or Devonta Smith.
In a vacuum, I would lean the package because we've just seen that Smith isn't going to be a consistent weekly producer as long as A.J. Brown's there, right? But I will say I think the timing of this move is fine because I do expect Smith to see more target volume and production with Goddard out for a few weeks. If you're contending, that's fine to ride Devontae Smith, but I would try to get something back at least. And if this is just a value move, I would look to flip Smith then over the next couple of weeks if he does have some nice games.
I think Devonta Smith is a definite buy, but I think he's more in that, that T. Higgins, that number 2 wide receiver who's going to be in that, 11 to 14 range than what a lot of people in the dynasty community wanted to make him top 10, top 8. They were trying to push out A.J. Brown too early. I have no problem in this particular one. I think he's buying Devontae Smith, and I have no problem with that value. I feel like if you do that and you're a contender, you get back Jerome Ford in this one, right? You get back that guy. You get back someone who's going to throw in,
Kyron Williams, right? Who's kind of been forgotten a little bit. Someone that may not be valued currently.
Yeah. I just bought him in Smash Accept 9 for a late, it's my 24 second, and I'm 9-0 or 10-0. So it'll probably be really late. And I was all for it. I think I didn't love the talent of Kyron Williams. And you talked about Joe Mixon. I mean, a lot of Kyron Williams' work was volume driven, volume dependent. And Matthew Stafford's injured, and there's a lot of questions of will Henderson still be in the picture and some of these other guys, but it's definitely worth the speculation. He was a top 10 back before he went down. So yeah, I'm all for that. Next one sent in from, there's a lot here sent in from some of the same guys, but let's do another one here from MP Fleming. Cause I've had this Kyle Pitts, Sam Laporta, all these different avenues here. I have one trade where it's Freiermuth in a second in 2025 for Kyle Pitts. For me, I'll buy Kyle Pitts for that. But then I saw someone trade Sam Laporta for Kyle Pitts and a 24 second, and I'm taking Laporta there. It's like, what are you doing with the Pitts shares? So many people are trying to move one way or another. I think Pat Freiermuth in a 25 second is not what my yield is. I'm trying to move myself up.
No, I would. If I'm moving Laporta, I would at least want Laporta in a second for Pitts in a first.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would do it for Pitts in a second.
No, I'm with you. There's just a lot of talk there. I mean, if you time everything right, I was buying Kincaid for Laporta, or I was buying, Kincaid for plus for Laporta. Now I would say they're neck and neck, if not right in that same area where Kincaid has looked fantastic. So the tight end market is.
And don't forget about Michael Mayer, right?
Yeah.
He's finally coming on, had a great end zone catch this past week against the Jets where he just plucked the ball away from the defender. Look, the quarterback's an issue, right? Because we don't know if it's Aiden O'Connell, somebody else. We don't know who the coach is going to be long-term, but the talent's there. Devontae Adams is getting up there. So I think Mayer is a great buy right now, too.
Yeah, no, I like that. I got two straight Kamara deals I want to talk about here. The first one sent in from JC. He said he's punting this year, and he got a mid to late 24 second and 24 first for Alvin Kamara and a 24 third. I think if you're punting, that's an absolute smash if you can still get that kind of capital for Alvin Kamara. On the flip side,
I think the 24 first alone would have been fair. So great value.
Absolutely. And then the second one from Jay Spanny 22, he's adding Kamara and Ayuk. You got Kamara, Ayuk, and then he got a first thrown in for Debo, Jordan Addison, and Kyron Williams. So Kamara, Ayuk, and a late first, or Debo, Kyron, and Addison.
I think Ayuk and Debo are pretty close. They're going to alternate big weeks here and there when both are healthy. And then Ayuk's a free agent after this year. So it's possible that both of them could see more targets heading into 2024 if Ayuk goes elsewhere. And then what was the other part?
Kamara and a first, and then the other side's Kyron and Addison.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty fair deal overall between contending and rebuilding.
See, I love it because I think Brandon Ayuk, I think you're absolutely right. This year, they're going to kind of go back and forth a little bit. I think the talent on Brandon Ayuk is he's either going to stay there and be in this fringe wide receiver 1, 12 to 15 range, or he's going to go somewhere else and get a bag and become a wide receiver 1. The talent on him is phenomenal. So, like, I've been buying Ayuk in similar fashion to T. Higgins with the idea of they're already in a premium offense. If worst case scenarios, they go somewhere else and they become the wide receiver 1 and get more volume. So, I mean, I think that I believe in the talent on both of those. Next one sent in from Big Muzz 26, Rashee Rice and Keaton Mitchell, or Russell Wilson in a 24th third for Russ's. It's for a competing roster.
I would take Rice slightly, I think. Well, I think it's close enough. It makes sense. Wilson's quietly been playing pretty well. I think he's a top 12 quarterback on the season in fantasy. But Rice, I think there's a lot of upside. At the same time, we haven't seen consistent usage from the Chiefs. Maybe that changes coming out of the bye, but overall, I'd say this is a pretty fair deal.
Yeah, he's QB 14 right now, so he's been fringe in that area. Keaton Mitchell's one I want to talk about. So Keaton Mitchell looked like lightning in a bottle the last 2 weeks. I mean, he has been fantastic. Obviously, Gus Edwards isn't completely going away. Lamar's not going away. I have seen people trading 25 firsts for Keaton Mitchell. Keaton Mitchell is one of my most owned players, like Joshua Dobbs, someone I just owned on all my rosters because it was free. You know, like you're just picking him up as a speculation. We always talk about not that running back starter, not that backup, that third guy. He could be that. It looks like that's Keaton Mitchell. What do you see from him the rest of the way? Like a lot of people are trying to speculate that he's like a league winner. You know, that's a word that's thrown around all the time now, is this guy's a league winner. But you look what he was able to do. I mean, the yards per carry are just absurd. You can't really go by that. You know, 9 for 138 in a touchdown, 3 for 34 in a touchdown, you know, at 14 yards per carry. That's not bad. But what do we see from this 21-year-old the rest of the way?
Yeah, Mitchell is electric, right? Every time he touches the ball, much like Achane, you could see a long touchdown, and he's super fun. There's two big distinguishing factors between Mitchell and Achane, though. One, which people tend to write off as soon as we've seen them play in the NFL, is draft capital.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden they're saying, oh, okay, well, Baltimore clearly sees what they have in Mitchell. And yeah, they do. I think Baltimore is a well-managed team. But at the same time, we've seen with guys like James Robinson, who was also an undrafted free agent, right? Yeah. Even if you've been producing for a season, maybe longer, right? As soon as you get hurt or as soon as you don't produce for a few games in a row, because of that lack of draft capital, teams are willing to move on a lot more quickly. So I think that's one. And two, again, I've said this about Achane all offseason too, is he ran between the tackles a lot, and he did it efficiently in college, right? And he's not just speed, which is also true of Mitchell. But again, I think those are the two big factors where Mitchell's a hold or a buy at the right cost, but I would not pay a first for him.
Yeah, I mean, on the flip side, now I'm glad you said that he's a hold or a buy. So some people are saying, well, he's a sell. So if you sold him and you're a contender for a 24-second and he balls out the rest of the way, it's pure loss, right? But if you're a rebuilding team, I can see kind of moving him. That's the spot where it's like, if I'm rebuilding, I want to get a 24 first for Keaton Mitchell in a 24-second. Try to move into that area, because if you're rebuilding, now's the time you want to move him, because I don't think, like you said, he's not going to be a guy that's worth a mid 24 first at any point. You know, even if he would go on for 1,000 yards here the rest of the season because of that draft capital, I think you're absolutely right there. Like he's looked good, but we're not paying that much. All right. That's most of the trades. Now I just want to like play a little bit of, you know, some of our rankings, play a little bit of devil's advocate, go back and forth, kind of hit off each other. Who's your biggest buy right now at the running back position for a contending team?
At cost, I would say it's probably Jerome Ford, because he's a guy that people are still worried about. Kareem Hunt, right? Certainly vultured a goal line touchdown against the Ravens this past week, but Ford saw a season high snap share against Baltimore, coming back off the calf injury. He seems fully healthy, and they get a great playoff schedule. The Browns play the Bears in week 15, the Texans in week 16, and the Jets in week 17. And people always cringe when they see the Jets playoff, but the Jets are elite against the pass, not as great against the run. And especially with the Browns defense, I do think that they are going to be in winning situations in 2, maybe 3 of those games, because Stroud seems like a superstar in the making, but the Browns defense is a whole nother tier that he hasn't faced just yet. So I think there's a chance that Ford sees a lot of work over the second half of the season. And I do think that the touchdowns will be there. We've seen him break off some big runs, even if Kareem Hunt does steal some of that red zone work.
And as soon as, you know, Chubb went down, he was going for a mid 24-second. I'm seeing people getting him for a pair of 3s right now. I would pay a late 24-second for Ford and get yourself into that area. For the guys that I'm looking to buy in that mid to early 24-second, I'm seeing consistently, I'm seeing Isaiah Pacheco, Joe Mixon, Ramondre Stevenson, and David Montgomery still going for early seconds. And I think all four of those guys, Pacheco, I know you love, who has a great playoff schedule down the stretch. Joe Mixon, again, it's not pretty, but the numbers are borderline RB1. Ramondre Stevenson over the last 5 weeks has been getting the receiving work where he's bounced back. And David Montgomery somehow, I mean, his first week back, he's RB13, and I'm still able to, I bought him again, another share this week for a mid to maybe early 202, 203 range. When you can get a running back like that, any of those guys, I think that's the production you buy and you just smash it.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I would rather, if you're contending, I would rather spend an early mid-second on one of those guys than taking a shot on a guy like Keaton Mitchell, who has a ton of hype right now.
Playing a little bit here in the similar tier, I want to play Keep Trade Cut with Kenneth Walker, Devin Achane, and Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, I would keep Achane. I would trade Walker only because he has probably more trade value right now because he has been producing and he has the name value. Whereas Barkley he's been the workhorse that we've all wanted. It's just on an absolutely horrendous Giants offense.
Yeah.
But elite volume. Their offensive line, knock on wood, can only get healthier from here. And look, the volume's there. I think Barkley's quietly a buy for next season. I don't know how much we trust him to produce rest of season if you're contending. But it sounds like the Giants want him to stay long term.
Mm-hmm.
And again, whatever you think of Daniel Jones, whatever has happened this season, I don't think the Giants will be quite as bad next year.
They definitely can't, Danny's son, Tommy DeVito, though, he did throw for 2 touchdowns last week. I found myself trading. I made a trade where I got Patrick Mahomes. So I could pair Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, but I had no quarterbacks this week. So I traded Dontavian Wicks in a 4th for Tommy DeVito. And he balled out for me, man. Got 19 points, but that was the grossest
garbage
game.
Time is still points.
Man, that's a crazy game. I don't even want to get into that. If you have Saquon and you're not comfortable in that area, I mean, you trade for guys in a similar area, Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift, Josh Jacobs, Kamara plus, if you get any of those guys plus, are you advocating moving that way? Because I think there's going to be some games where Saquon puts up 8 to 10.
I just don't know that I'd be trying to move off Barkley. I just don't know what you would realistically get because I don't think you're getting Jacobs plus or Eckler plus, as crazy as it sounds. Because
what about Swift?
You know how I feel about Swift. I don't trust him.
Kamara in a second.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're a strong contender, you're going to lose value long term because I do believe in Barkley's elite talent and he's still pretty young. But look, this offense is awful right now. It's completely volume driven, which isn't sustainable. And then look at their playoff schedule. The Giants play the Saints, who have a tough front seven, the Eagles, which are a really tough run defense, and the Rams, which are tough too. So really you're hoping for PPR garbage time volume, and that's not what you want to rely on come the fantasy playoffs. So yeah, again, you're going to regret it in a year or two, but come this time of year, you really need to play your dynasty leagues a little more like redraft if you're contending, where I told somebody I don't love selling Justin Jefferson for CeeDee Lamb in a second, but if you're a strong contender and the Cowboys have a phenomenal rest of season schedule, I think it's close enough where you can eat a little bit of a value loss and go for a title.
Yo, Jefferson's coming back, man. Don't disrespect Josh
Dobbs. With Joshua Dobbs, I think
Joshua Dobbs is so I think Justin Jefferson makes Joshua Dobbs better. Joshua Dobbs is a top 10 dynasty quarterback right now as far as redraft quarterback. Right now he's been
I love Jefferson boosting Dobbs's production rest of season. But when you look at Marquise Brown's struggles in Arizona with Dobbs, some of those missed wide open throws downfield, I think Jefferson's fine. He's still going to be a back-end wide receiver 1. My fear is he's going to be very boom bust, much like Devontae Adams with the quarterback issues he's had. So again, it depends on value. It depends on how strong your roster is. I don't know that I'm quite believing in elite production from Jefferson once he comes back, because the narrative of Dobbs, and he's played well, I just don't know that he's elevating his fantasy assets quite the way that Kirk Cousins was able to.
I think Dobbs, he threw for 268 and 2 against a really, really good Saints secondary. So I'm hoping for it. I hate moving Jefferson at any cost. It's just, but the way CeeDee Lamb has played, he's been the wide receiver 1 over the last 4 weeks. So I want to play a little bit more here, off a little bit more keep trade cut. We'll stay at the wide receiver position. We're going to go Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, and Jalen Waddle. You can see we're like an old married couple. I'm like poking at your favorite guys here, like trying to make you know what I mean? Like you have that argument, you're like, you're just like your mother. Like you're in this area where you're like, all right, I'm gonna give you your guys because I know what buttons to push.
I think this one really depends on if you're contending or rebuilding. Because if you're contending, you're obviously keeping Tyreek Hill, right? That's 100%. A no-brainer. And then you're probably cutting Diggs and trading Waddle for value. But if you're rebuilding, I would actually say I would be keeping Waddle, trading Tyreek at peak value, and cutting Diggs.
So if you're right now, let's say you're contending, would you trade Waddle in a second to get Tyreek? And if you're rebuilding, would you trade Tyreek in a second to get Waddle? Like it's weird scenario, right? Like it's going to cost you one way or another. But I think what I've been telling everybody is if you have Waddle and you want to win it all, Waddle's not the guy that's going to do it for you. It's going to be Tyreek. And if you want to add a little bit to get to him, go ahead and do it. If you're rebuilding and you have Tyreek, now's the time to move to Waddle.
Yeah, I think they're close enough where I would think a straight up swap would be fair. The only reason I don't know that I would do it is because Tyreek Hill's been phenomenal, and I don't think any defense is really going to shut him down.
No, he's the Christian McCaffrey of the wide receiver world now.
Correct. But I will say I don't think he's going to quite have the massive games he had early in the season, because that was really bolstered, by the massive games against the Broncos and then the Panthers, right? Where I think he's a safe bet every week.
Their playoff matchup is brutal. It's Jets,
it's
Cowboys,
terrible.
And Ravens. Like it's as bad as it gets. I have told everybody that I'm not on Tua for that reason. Because I mean, the Jets, let's be honest, the Jets are shutting everyone down. They make quarterbacks look like garbage. Dallas, very similar, and Baltimore's equal with the Jets. I mean, this is as bad as it gets for a playoff schedule.
And that's part of the reason, because particularly the Ravens in championship week, their whole defensive strategy is not unlike Belichick's, where they try to take away your number one guy, right? They learned that the hard way. I think it was last year or 2 years ago when they tried to put single coverage, man coverage on Jamar Chase, and they really learned from that lesson. And now they really try to take away the opposing number one, which is why I kind of like Waddle rest of season, because people are kind of off of him because he had the concussion early in the season, and then he just was struggling to produce coming back from the concussion. And I really do think that the Dolphins offense was firing on all cylinders so easily that they just didn't really ever need to go down to that secondary option, where Hill and Achane were just taking it to the house almost every other play. But as their schedule does get a lot tougher over the second half of the season, I do think Tua is going to need to check down to Waddle a lot more. So again, yes, I would still prefer Hill over Waddle rest of season if we're talking just redraft or just contending. But I think with the dynasty implications, I think more straight up is more than fair. I don't know that I'm adding to Waddle. Maybe a second, like you said, a late second, if I really do want to push all in. But it would not shock me if they produce similarly over these next 5-6 games.
If you're looking at that, I mean, Stephon Diggs has been fantastic as well. His schedule, he gets the Chargers and the Patriots in the, semis and the championship. Is it enough to consider making a move to try to do a 2 for 2, like where you give up, Tyreek Hill and a running back and get Stephon Diggs and a better running back? Is that something we should even be tinkering with? Like this is the first that I've looked at that schedule and said, oh crap, this is bad. And I'm out on Tua. Tyreek, I think, is still going to get his, but that kind of matchup, you're looking at maybe like a 5 for 60.
So the only reason I would say no is because I do think that the talent is still a dividing factor.
Mm-hmm.
Where I am nervous because I have invested in Tua in a lot of dynasty leagues. We talked a lot this past offseason and in the preseason about how high I am on this Dolphins offense.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I wouldn't necessarily make that type of move is because I do think that there's a chance, even against an elite Jets defense that's shut down everybody, a Dallas defense that's really given everyone struggles, there's still a chance that Tua and Tyreek just go off, right? You can't write it off, and you're certainly not benching any of them. Where it comes to a point where I believe enough in Mike McDaniel that I don't know that I'd make that move unless I'm really getting Diggs plus for Hill.
Mm-hmm. The interesting trades that I've been seeing right now, and if you're moving off of Diggs or Tyreek, is I've seen a lot of trades of either of them for Keenan Allen plus a 24 first. Keenan Allen has been so good, like so good. And when we talk about the age gap there, I mean, it's not crazy between where they are, where, you could see Keenan Allen doing something similar to this next year, or maybe at least falling into that wide receiver 2 range. If someone came to you today and they offered you, you have for Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, and the 107, which would you prefer?
It's something that I would have considered a week ago. With the shoulder sprain, I'm a little bit more nervous about Keenan Allen. He was able to finish the game against the Lions, but this is something that can still either flare up and have him miss a little bit of time, or just limit him where he's still good, but not quite that great rest of season. I'm more risk adverse, so I don't think it's necessarily a bad move, but that's not something I would do right now until we have more clarity on the shoulder injury.
I like that. This is that time of the year or time of the podcast where we get to the end, right? And we throw out the Keaton Mitchell names. We throw out the Josh Dobbs. We throw out some of those guys where that's not who we're throwing out now. That's who we threw out like a long time ago. Who are we throwing out right now where it's just like, who's a guy that people aren't paying enough attention to other than Jerome Ford?
Yeah, it's tough because a lot of those guys are on rosters or at least fairly valued at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of like betting on the Giants plus 10 this week against Washington. Nobody really wants to bet on the Giants. And nobody really wants to buy Baker Mayfield, right?
Yeah.
And he's quietly been playing pretty well, right? He has his moments where he seems to just shut down, but fantasy-wise, he's been producing. He's been awesome, and it sounds like they just really didn't believe in Kyle Trask, which is why they brought in Mayfield, and I don't see him losing this job rest of season, right? And I think it's at the point where we do have to consider that maybe Baker Mayfield is just a solid QB2 rest of season.
Yeah, I like that a lot. For me, and this is where I've already have him on most of my rosters. We talk about buying that guy who's next up. It's Ty Chandler. I think Madison has played surprisingly decent. The schedule upcoming with Denver, Chicago, and the Raiders in the next 3 games, where Madison already is in the concussion protocol. If Chandler gets an opportunity, I think he's got a shot here to put up some decent numbers where you could still get him. I know he's on people's waiver wires, but the other guys we talk about, Tyler Boyd's always been that third wide receiver. Noah Brown, we just saw 2 straight games of him where he's been fantastic. Nico Collins is going to come back, and he's probably going to fade back there again. Then after that happens, I'm buying him cheap because he feels like that next Tyler Boyd type, where in an elite offense, where when he gets an opportunity, he'll perform. Otherwise, he's just kind of an ancillary piece. So
yeah, and here's one where he got some hype earlier in the season, but people have either forgotten him or written him off now, is Joshua Kelly. Because if you recall, Austin Eckler got hurt in week 1, and then people were hyped about Kelly taking over as the handcuff, right? Then he really performed poorly over the next few weeks until Eckler was back. But when you look back at the schedule, Kelly struggled against the Titans, who are a pass funnel defense, right? Really good at stopping the run. Then they went and faced Minnesota, and we've since learned that their defense is not great against the pass, but it's been solid against the run and the pass rush. They have a good front seven there. And then he did okay against the Raiders. He just didn't score a touchdown. 17 carries. He got the volume. I do think that Kelly would still be the clear handcuff to Eckler, but because he underperformed when he had that opportunity earlier in the season, people are really off of him. And I think you can get Kelly for a third right now.
I think so.
When you look at the playoff schedule for the Chargers, I mean, week 14, right before the fantasy playoffs, they go against Denver, where their defense has gotten a much better, but are still getting gashed by the run. We saw what James Cook did to them last night. Then they play the Raiders, the Bills, and then the Broncos again in the fantasy playoffs. So if Eckler were to miss any time, as gross as it sounds, I think Kelly's still the guy there.
Yeah, and we just kind of we wanted him to be that guy for a couple of weeks, and everyone just assumed because week 1 he put up 20 fantasy points. Yeah, that's a great buy low on there and get him thrown in some deals.
Off a 60-yard run against the Chiefs when they faced off, something like that. So we know that he has some big playability. And again, I think they trust him. They like him there as the number 2.
I like it. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and enjoy the process.